Committee Model Review Group. First item on the agenda is welcome introductions and safety information. So Councillor Guy Pulteney, I'll be chairing this working group. Councillors.
Hello, Councillor Heather Mack.
I'm Councillor Rob Breyer.
Councillor Cass Self.
Councillor Kai Dodd.
Councillor Joss Clark.
Councillor Richard Eddy.
Clerk Taylor Meager. Lucy Fleming, Head of Democratic Engagement and Executive Support.
Morning, Tim O'Gara, Director of Legal and Democratic Services.
Thank you very much. We have an apology from Councillor Andrew Brown and Councillor Joss Clark substituting in. Is our only apologies, I think? Oh, delegating. Is it? It'll be lovely having you in for the committee, Joss. Do we have any declarations of interest? I shouldn't have thought. Fantastic. Which brings us to public forum. We've had 2 questions. But on a personal note for me, how nice it is to have public forum coming in for something that's as traditionally sort of technocratic, I suppose, as Council's legal basis and constitution and that sort of thing. So the first question was from Dan Ackroyd. Apologies to Dan, he hasn't had a written response yet. I'll give him a verbal response in this meeting to both questions and then provide you with a written response as soon as I can. Dan's question concerned scrutiny meetings and how they worked before. And a little bit of scepticism, I think it's fair to say, in the question about their efficacy. I would say, I think with both of your questions, both this and the one on consultation, there's a challenge in the way that sort of the culture of the council and that councillors come to see both of these terms are quite different in some cases to how members of the public see them. So on scrutiny, a definition of what good scrutiny looks like. And there are really good definitions from various bodies that this committee met with last year, but I think there's both that sense of the analysis of policy and delivery with a view to improving it, that sort of constant sort of review of what the council's policy is and how we can make it better. But I think the public tends to emphasise that sense of accountability more sometimes than happens within the council, and particularly the sort of, I don't want to say deterrent effect, but the effect that that has on policy formulation. There's always that sense that you could be held accountable for something that later doesn't work. I know that there have been concerns raised about scrutiny under the committee model as we've seen so far, and it's certainly something I'm looking forward to this committee looking at in more detail. And we will be under the work programme. In terms of consultations, again, I think, to try and answer your question as honestly as I can, I think the council tends to think of consultation as what we do when we ask the public around refining a solution to a problem. This is the kind of proposal. What do the public think? How could we change it? How can we tweak it? What I think the public are referring to is how are the views of people taken into account in that process as a whole? And it tends to miss out sometimes that need to take people on that policy journey from actually, should we involve people more in identifying the problem and conceptualizing the solution? And that earlier stage, call it engagement, call it involvement, I think the earlier that happens, the better. But of course, people get more interested in the policy as it gets closer and closer to implementation. Again, something this committee will be looking at in a lot of detail. I have been sent some stuff to send across to you, both on consultations and scrutiny, just to give you some examples. But I really look forward to that conversation continuing as this committee moves along. Do you have any supplementaries?
I think I'll wait for your written response and formulate a proper reply, proper question to ask rather than just rambling for a bit.
Cool, thank you very much. Obviously, the committee's had your statement through. Did you want to speak to it?
Not for too long, hopefully, but yeah, I really hope this committee can make some incremental improvements before it completes its work next year. It's really, really inconvenient when meeting papers cannot be searched or copied from. This has happened multiple times for the audit committee papers, as well as the Savills report about the terrible state of Bristol housing. Another small item is that when a member asks a question and no officer present is able to answer it, this should automatically get a written response. Important matters are just being dropped just because a councillor forgets to ask for a written response during the meeting. And committees are having their work frustrated by officers not being present for meetings where it is obvious that they should be present to answer questions. It was quite ridiculous that nobody from the legal team was present in the audit committee on Monday. On a second topic, I'm not sure if anybody has noticed, but there's been a huge amount of propaganda being used against this country. I believe it to be the primary factor in causing the right-wing riots in this country this summer. I would very much like to start a conversation about Bristol City Council providing an API to be used to allow people to prove that they are Bristolians, so that websites and apps can allow only people from Bristol to take part in conversations. Obviously, that would be a huge amount of work. So I guess the first part of the conversation would be, how can I show that it's even a good idea? And third and finally, although the mayor was an unpleasant person, and a lot of the reasons that people voted to change from the mayoral system to the committee system were not entirely his fault, this council has a legal department that does not act judiciously and pushes the interpretation of the law to its limit, which invites judicial reviews. This makes people doubt Bristol City Council is actually a legitimate government that follows the rule of law. Instead, the legal department acts to enable BCC to do whatever the politicians and senior officers think is best, and unless someone has enough money to fund a judicial review, their opinion can be entirely ignored. I urge the committee to consider this problem at some point during its work. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan, and I will provide you a written response to that as well. Safe to say, I do think it's very important to acknowledge in fact, it's key to acknowledge there are sometimes a local authority is required to stay within the law, and that is very much within the realm of officers, and it's for the council to ensure that it's acting lawfully, corporately. There are also times when officers are required by the nature of their role to be at the mercy of politicians. And I do think there are aspects of your statement that apply as much to elected politicians, and more so, at the end of the day, the elected politicians are the ones who are accountable for these things, than officers. And I do think that's a distinction we really, really do need to make. I will provide you with a written response, but I think we could certainly all agree on statement 5 at the end of your statement. Breaches of the law need to be acknowledged openly rather than being covered up. I'm going to take that as a statement of principle rather than an allegation, and as a statement of principle, I think we should all get behind that. That's absolutely key, and look forward to your ongoing involvement with this committee as we move along. At which point, we haven't received any petitions, as far as I'm aware, which brings us to the annual business report.
Hi members, so as this is the first meeting this municipal year of the review group, we have the usual annual business report for you to consider. So asking you then to note the membership for the board, to note the chair and the vice chair, so that's Councillor Pulteney and Councillor Eddy respectively. Could you please note the terms of reference which have already been approved at full council, as you all know. And then could I draw your attention to the schedule of public meetings, please? So this is set out in your report, which is in section D. So we have meetings on the 19th of December, 30th of January, 27th of February and 13th of March. So are they okay as a provisional position on your meeting dates? And of course, they can be subject to change if you wish to add more, depending on how you get on with your work. So I'll take those as agreed. And also, we have a draft work programme for you, which is set out in Appendix B. But I imagine, members, that you will wish to comment on that through the course of your discussions in the meeting today. So, perhaps we just note that that's draft at the moment, subject to any changes that arise from the discussion today, if that's okay.
Thanks, Lucy. So as far as the recommendations go, are we happy to take A, B, and C as agreed, and to approve the upcoming schedules of public meetings for 2024-2025, knowing that they may well change? Fantastic. Would anyone like to comment on the draft work programme? I'd start with a sort of slight disclaimer that obviously the same applies to the draft work programme. It may well change as we go along. The concerns raised with me so far, or the things that people have said they would like this committee to look at, have either been very, very big and very, very broad, kind of nebulous principles, or they've been some quite specific, quite granular issues around specific policies and processes. So I think this is going to have to be fairly fluid, but let's go through it. So, Councillor Eddie first.
Yes, Chairman, I think this looks quite comprehensive, but it's going to be fluid, as you mentioned, of course. The one area where I think it's omitted, and I have raised this with Tim and Lucy before, so hopefully we can fit it in. When the original committee met, and I think only yourself and myself were members, there was some concern by external stakeholders like the Health Service about how they would connect with the council. Now, anecdotally, I think it's worked fairly well that, in fact, policy committee chairs have often chaired or been involved with one city boards, but I would like some confirmation that it's working okay. So perhaps we could communicate with those, and I appreciate it's pre-Christmas, so I'm not expecting a quick reply, and perhaps factor in some analysis, say in February.
Yes, I think that point's well made. So February has feedback from resident stakeholder engagement, but possibly reviewing feedback beyond that, because that could well be quite substantial. I should say as well, I've asked for hopefully we'll be able to circulate this to members fairly shortly, but a sort of database, if you like, almost like a wiki of what happened under the committee model working group, just so that we can make sure that we've got all of the stakeholder engagement from that as well. And I would also remind members, we do still have the pack for any councillors that wish to engage residents in their specific wards to get their view. We do have a facilitation pack available to help you do that. I'd done it in Cosham. I have to admit, it was incredibly valuable. I may well do it again, but it's worth considering. Thank you, Councillor Eddy. Councillor Mack.
Yeah, I think this work plan, well, it's had an amount of input. I think it covers the majority of the necessary questions, which is a lot of questions. Looking at it, and we've already discussed this, I do think December's got a lot of content, and I think that there's some really crucial bits that will weave through a lot of the questions that come afterwards. And sadly, and very unfortunately, I can't make the December meeting, which is a pity, but I do understand the way that we will operate. Like, I think conversations will be started in December. I think there might be proposals put on the table. There might be preferred proposals at that point. But I understand that we can keep revisiting and coming back and then have a full set of proposals at the end of the process. So, yeah, I think I have concerns of how much was in December, but as long as we know that there might be questions that are opened and take us a while to close from December, I think that's fine, and I think it's a good way of operating.
Thank you. Councillor Dudd.
Yeah, just on the order of what we're going to look at, I think it's probably the right order, but it might not be, because potentially how you want to make policy might drive what the job description should be. So the point I'm trying to make is that we may discuss things in one meeting and come to a sort of a view, and then that's impacted by the following meeting in terms of, as I say, we might how we make policy then might impact on the previous settled view. So the point I'm making is that nothing's agreed until everything's agreed at the end. So just for members of the public, you may come to a meeting and it looks like we've agreed something about a job description, but then a following meeting affects that. But nothing will be agreed until the end. That's the point I just wanted to put on record.
I would wholeheartedly endorse that approach. I appreciate what was in Dan's statement to Public Forum about sort of making decisions as we go incrementally, and I do think that's really important. But I think you're exactly right, and I think it's one of the things that I'm not sure we did well enough with the committee model working group was that sense of a sort of circular process. I think that December meeting ideally will kind of be there to identify the framework as like the gaps to be filled by the remit, and then we come back at the end to sort of review that and to look at actually how those things are working. I have to admit I have a particular interest in area committees, and that's something where I think we will absolutely need to talk about at the next meeting. But certainly you're right, nothing is over till it's over, because until you see how the system operates as a whole, then you can't really make any one decision until you're ready to make all the others. So I wholeheartedly agree. Anything else from anyone else? Great, thank you very much. The only thing I would just do, if anyone feels ready, and appreciating people may want to have these discussions between now and our next meeting, but it would be helpful to sort of air, if you like, any specific areas where people think that is going to be contentious, or I have quite strong views on that, just so that we can make sure that I'm timetabling this really, really well. I think the biggest enemy this committee is going to have, this working group, apologies, is going to have this time. We have one meeting to set a framework, 2 meetings to sort of fill in that framework, if you like, and then an awful lot has to be ready for the March meeting in order to make the audit deadlines and subsequent, all sorts of constitutional deadlines to make it to the May AGM of Council. It may well be we need to keep going on beyond that period in whatever form this committee takes in the future. But if there is anything you want to flag now as thinking we'll need a lot of time for that, please do.
Can I just ask a constitutional question? So does this need to be ready for the AGM for it to take effect in the next municipal year, or could this be brought to a meeting outside of the AGM and we can change the constitution outside of the AGM? Is that possible? Or is there a higher voting threshold or something like that if you do it outside of the AGM?
I will check with officers, but as far as I know, we can bring anything when we need to, but we have set that May full council as the deadline for reporting back everything currently. That's the state of affairs.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So ideally, we would report back to the AGM in May. If we haven't completed the work that we need to do, then I would recommend that we send a holding position, because I think the work needs to be done and completed before we make final recommendations, which obviously will need the approval of full council if they're connected to the council's constitution. So reporting to the AGM regardless, ideally with recommendations, but I don't think it's fatal if we have to wait another couple of months to complete all of the work.
Thanks, Tim. Councillor Reddy.
In a way, my comment piggybacks Tim's contribution there. Whilst we've got to set ourselves a 6-month time frame, in my view, this is what's required at this stage, but we'll only see how the new constitution pans out in a fuller way in a couple of years. So I'm sure we'll have to look again or tweak things beyond the 6 months.
No, I concur. Councillor Breyer?
Thank you. I was just going to suggest that one of the contentious areas is, as you've already mentioned, the area committee is not necessarily contentious, but more involved in that we have, you know, a significant amount of ability to delegate decision making to those committees. So I think that would be one to have a substantial amount of time to get into, because we all have an area. We all have an area committee. We all want to kind of think through the best way of structuring those meetings particularly. And it's a substantial amount of change if we move more decision making out from, I suppose, the main structure of the committees, if you see what I mean. So I'd say that was one that we'd need a bit more time on, maybe.
I concur. Music to my ears. I do think there is an extent to which area committees and that process is evolving sort of concurrently with this committee, if you like. And I do think we need to, last time, to be honest, area committees and the discussion around it became quite time consuming, I think, because several members of the committee, myself guiltily included, are very, very interested in area committees and how we take those forward. I do think it might be something for this working group to consider between now and the next meeting is, do we want to re-establish a sub-working group, if you like, a separate working group to look at area committees so that its business doesn't come to dominate the working of this committee and bring something back. Something to think about between now and then. Councillor Eddy?
Just wanted to ask, Chairman, you very sensibly suggested the body or summary of the work the previous working group done comes to members. You may recall, or you will recall, I'm sure, and Tim and Lucy will, that we did look at things which were like possible to delegate in the short term, possibilities longer term, finance and other things allowing, and frankly things which were impossible or very unlikely. So that would, but by looking at that, that would save us reinventing the, you know.
No, I concur. It's definitely something I'll be looking at in the next few days. I do think the feedback I've had from councillors and actually from some community groups, members of the public as well, is I think we would, I'm not saying anything controversial to say, we would prioritise getting those up and running as soon as possible. We certainly wouldn't want to do anything to slow down meetings of those area committees. What I might be interested in is, can we make them happen any faster? Are there any points of clarification that were already sort of dealt with under the previous committee model that we might be able to take forward earlier than that? So it's as I say, conversations I'm keen to have with officers and with all of you as we move forward. But I do think we should hold that in reserve for the next meeting of this committee, is the possibility of reviewing that work just to see what might be possible in the short term. Councillor Self.
Thanks, Chair. On area committees, I just want to know, I haven't even had my first area committee meeting yet, so I've got no idea what they're all about, to be honest. So I'm not too keen to have a sort of subgroup working on those at this point in time. Obviously, as soon as we get into them, it would seem appropriate to try and address any issues as soon as we can, but to do it straight away seems a bit silly to me.
Sorry,
Councillor
I totally
Clark.
disagree with that, because I just think we need to get on with area committees. There's quite a bit of work to do on those. We've obviously, people who've been around a little while and have quite a lot of experience of area committees, and we can see where the problems are and how we can best use our time and the public's time with them. So I'm sure you'll get into the area committees really quickly and you'll start to understand where the issues are, the problems are, and how we can be effective as councillors to serve our wards.
Thank you both for those contributions. I appreciate both arguments. I think this might be a conversation to sort of have offline shortly afterwards. But Councillor Dudd.
Yeah, that's another thing we need a new system here, don't we, as well? That's something we should be looking at. So I think Kaz's point is that the area committees have been reformed from what they were in the previous administration, so they should be operating under a new kind of system, but they've not met yet. So isn't the problem that they've not met, not that they've been set up wrongly? How do we know how they're working or not working if they've not met. That's the issue.
Councillor Reddy?
I understand the point Kai is making, but they start next Monday. I've got one, I'm sure colleagues have, so by the time we meet in December, we'll start to have some understanding.
I hope so. I do think them not having met yet is part of the, to be honest, part of what I'd want to look at as to sort of why that is, how that's happened. I appreciate there was administrative oversight towards the end of...
That's not a constitutional issue, is it? That's just an operational issue.
Just a reminder, use your mic for webcasting.
Sorry, Chair, I should have gone through you.
It's okay, go for it.
So the fact that they've not met is not a constitutional issue. That's an operational issue, isn't it, that they've not met? So I'm a bit worried, are we trying to deal with an operational issue by using a constitutional mechanism to do that? Surely we should see how they work first and then look to review them if they're not working. I mean, we're here now because we've had 6 months of the committee system, so we've got a good idea about what works, what doesn't work. With the area committees, I don't know, because we've not met yet.
No, I concur. I do think it's a challenge, and it's why. So if I felt differently, I'd be proposing that we set up a sub-working group at this meeting. What I'd suggest is we take the next month between now and the December meeting to look at whether we think such a subgroup is necessary once we've had that first wave of area committee meetings happen. But also, I think my concerns came out of the training I had in area committees yesterday, which was very well provided. It's really, really good, thorough, comprehensive brief from officers. At the same time, I'm aware that the situation with area committees and their constitutional governance is developing as this committee goes along. And I think retaining a relationship between this working group and that development process is going to be critical. I am going to close off this rabbit hole that I've driven us down momentarily. I'll let Councillor Clark come in.
Thank you so much. Area committees, there are some real structural problems, and the structural problems are not the area committees, it's actually getting the work done through the SIL process. And actually that's the biggest problem that we've got, is if you look back at the sheets, how many projects are outstanding which go back to 2016? There are probably still quite a few that go back to the previous iteration of the area committees, and that is the problem, is actually getting work delivered in parks and transport roads. I mean, that's where we have the biggest stumbling block with the area committees. Sorry, that's my rant over, well, one of them.
I do appreciate it. I think what really struck me was the sense that area committees, yes, so far we haven't had a meeting of one. I don't think yet, although they're happening imminently. As far as I'm aware, there won't be a decision-making meeting of those till May. In other words, we will be presenting to the AGM at roughly the same time the area committees may have just had or just be about to have their first decision-making meeting a year in to the reform process. I think if we wait until we've gotten a grip on area committees, we might well be looking at the second annual review of the committee model working group, committee model working. So it's, as I say, let's take some time between now and the next meeting to think how we might best address this. In the meantime, I'm going to very respectfully and politely ask that this committee be kept up, this working group be kept up to date with any sort of implementation of this, so that we can have a really as full and as rounded a discussion of it as we possibly can when it appears on our work programme, at which point I'll move on from area committees, if that's okay. Is there anything else anyone wishes to raise? I've got a few, but I want to make sure we get them from the committee. In which case I'll throw some of mine out quickly, but I think certainly there have been issues raised through the public forum, and I do think public forum is something that we really will want to think about very carefully. We had a meeting, I don't think people would mind me saying this, we had a meeting of Development Control A committee not so long ago, where a group of councillors were reflecting on some of the equalities issues currently around public forum, and actually are the timings too rigid, or the way that we take submissions too rigid? Should we allow more discretion to chairs in terms of making sure that the public really feel that their voices have been heard and actually giving time for councillors to hear it and to respond to it. Councillor Self.
Thanks, Chair. I'm glad you mentioned this because and I do appreciate the statement from Dan. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of his points he made actually on point 5 about the submitting the questions and the formatting on point 4. Yeah, we had 100 public statements in Public Rights of Grey and Green yesterday, and I think most councillors would like to try and look at all of those if they can, but it does leave very limited time if you want to look at all those. So I've got a little bit, as much as I appreciate what's been said, I think we need to appreciate that councillors need some time to be able to look at these statements if they get so many as these. And on the formatting, I appreciate again what you're saying. I noticed that, but if you've got 100 statements, it's a very onerous task for our colleagues, officers, to try and format all those in a format that's acceptable. So I just wanted to recognise that.
Thank you. Councillor Eddy, then Councillor Dad.
Just to seek clarity, Chairman, it seems to be we have the annual business report, which is distinct. I believe we noted the items there. And the other more discussion element, it seems it's more the next report. Should we move on?
I think that's a good point to make. If there were any other things on the working group that are very, very brief, this is what you think we might need time on and why. My final one that I wanted to add in was scrutiny, but I do think that's been a point that's been raised a few times, and I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for a discussion of how that's working. This was something the committee model group talked a lot about, but found it very difficult to find a solution to. We've ended up with an escalation panel that sort of doubles as a judicial review body, but other committees actually able to mark their own homework, as it were. It's definitely something I think we need to talk about. Anything else anyone wants to raise? Obviously, feel free to raise things with me outside this meeting as well. Councillor Mack?
Yeah, just so the scrutiny, I guess scrutiny within committees, but I would also just say looking at how the call-in panel works, because I think there was quite a lot of discussion, ins and outs, and I'm not sure what came out is exactly how we wanted it to work during the committee model group.
I'd concur with that as well. I look forward to discussing this work programme with all of you and anyone else for that matter. And I'd please ask councillors to take this back to their political groups. Happy to meet with anyone. Happy to meet with members of the public, committee chairs, backbenchers, stakeholder groups, anyone. My only insistence would be that anything you want this committee to bear in mind needs to be on the record. It needs to actually come before this committee as a public decision-making meeting to feed in. On that note, I think we're done noting the work programme, and I will pass over to Tim to introduce the next section.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the other substantive report on the agenda is really a framing report that provides an overview of the work that was done previously by the Committee Model Working Group back through 2023. And there's a number of key areas of governance that the working group looked at that time, which are enshrined in the council's constitution now, and it's set out in paragraph 2 of the report. But ostensibly, it covers the whole structure, responsibilities of the committees for council, the roles of elected members generally, but also with specific responsibilities from the leader through to chairs of committees, party group leaders, Lord Mayor, etc. It talks. We covered things like the threshold for key decisions, publishing forward plans, which were things that were already in place under the previous governance arrangements with the directly elected mayor, but there was a strong desire to retain those arrangements for the new model of governance. We covered things like briefings for chairs and vice chairs of committees as part of the new arrangements and how we approached agenda setting. and we worked on a number of procedural rules, things, the policy committee procedure rules, how we would change things like member forum, our public forum arrangements and petition scheme were also reviewed as part of those, as part of that work. We did cover scrutiny in quite a lot of detail as part of the the working group, and the escalation panel was a product of those discussions. As Councillor Poultney has said, you know, we did a lot of work around local decision making, and those arrangements were revised. They're now being rolled out as you discussed earlier. And then we looked at a number of other things. Schemes of delegations were reviewed, including emergency decision making, some of our key external partnerships, the One City arrangements, for example. And we also adopted the Model Code of Conduct, the local government associations model code, and we revised our member officer protocol. So a significant amount of work was done over the course of 12-18 months of meetings of the working group, and the new arrangements went as a whole package to January Council, in January 24 Council for approval, having been reviewed by the Audit Committee on the way. So there was a significant amount of work done, but there was always the aspiration and intention to carry out a review in the first year of the new arrangements, and as you'll all know, that review kicks off here. 4 councils agreed the terms of reference. The terms of reference, I'm not going to go into detail on the specific elements of that. They in effect inform the forward plan for this review group, and they cover the things which you've already touched upon briefly in the earlier part of the discussion. As I said earlier, the intention is to report back to full council, but I don't think it's absolutely essential if we haven't completed our work, and a holding report could be done at the AGM if needs be. So I think that's all I'll say, Chair. Just happy to answer questions on the work of the committee model working group for those members who weren't on the council at the time, or who weren't on that working group, if there are questions. But this is really looking ahead, I guess, as to how things are working at the moment, and how the terms of reference and the work programme will be shaped over the coming months. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Councillor Bryant.
Thank you, Chair. As one of the councillors who wasn't elected at that point, I wonder whether you had a feedback mechanism for councillors who were on the committee, on the working group, was it at that point? Was there any kind of mechanism for them to feedback their experiences of going through the process, not the process that they ended up with, as we have ended up with as a council, but for their own personal reflections on it? Because I think that's often invaluable. Specifically now we've got this group, and we obviously don't want to go back and we want to learn from the experience of that group and find out what might not have worked so well. Equally, if there's stuff that's worked well, then we want to kind of replicate that. Just wonder whether there's any kind of option given for the councillors on that group to feedback or take some kind of soundings, maybe just informally, about how it went and what people felt about the way it went.
Thanks. I definitely have comments, but I'll defer to Councillor Eddy first.
I was just going to respond to Rob and saying I think Guy and myself are the only members electorally surviving. Everyone else is retired or being defeated. But seriously, the cardinal principle I think we all cross-party were working to is whatever happened in the new constitution, it should be more responsive and transparent than the previous mayoral model. So anything which contradicted that, in our view, was out. So if we believe elements have crept in which have actually aren't working as we intended, I hope we'll actually look at that. In my view, I think probably a lot of the differences are inconsistencies. So the primary requirement, I think Bristolians need to be assured, every policy committee works identically. Obviously, there are different personalities, both chairs, vice chairs, and membership, but we need to have the systems. They should work identically, of course. And I think that's important. At a meeting which the chairman and I had with the policy chairs, presided by Councillor Mack a few days ago, one element which was flagged up was clarity regarding the role of vice chair, which I think is important. So that element, among others, I'm sure we'll look at. What I would make a plea, I've heard, especially from new members, but this applies to previous members, a feeling that clearly there's a lot of time pressure, there's a lot of commitment, arguably more than some expected. For those of us who have somewhat larger memories, longer memories, the reality is we knew if you were a cabinet member, as a number of us around this table have been, you know what time constraints but equally that's applied to vice chairs or other committee members. So we'll be looking at that. What I would urge the committee, I would say, try to fix what we can fix and make these smooth running more effective. I don't think there's surplus capacity in the organisation of officer time, of money, of member time. So I would ask members to be realistic, please, because there isn't fat to trim in my view.
I'd concur. Resourcing capacity is one of the issues that's most frequently raised, I think, in as regards what is and isn't desirable for the council to do and for work to be taken on. Councillor Stone? Sorry, Councillor Clark.
Joss Stone, I mean... Thank you. I have been called that before, actually. I was once on radio. I was introduced as Joss Stone, which I suppose is a compliment. I don't know, Chair, if it's possible just to unpack a little bit of what Councillor Mack was referring to about the roles of the vice chairs, because my eyebrows raised, you saw me, and I'd just be really interested to maybe understand if you have some specifics at this stage. I'm not putting you on the spot, sorry.
I mean, actually, what was said is I was presiding over the meeting. And so, so I would actually say, so it was a meeting of chairs. So I can certainly comment on some of that, but it was not necessarily my opinions. It was the opinions of the meeting. And I think it is fair to say that there is an inconsistency. That's what you just said about how the committees are functioning in terms of engagement at different steps, from agenda setting, from briefings, and there's just a truth in terms of the political reality, and I think that there's this interesting big challenge of writing a constitution, and my view is a constitution, and the roles should work regardless of the political reality. And there's a really, we wrote it. The committee model met at a time when no one could be sure what the political reality was going to be. We are in a committee model, which is a model where there are four parties in this case that come together in committees to make decisions. But we are in a situation where one party is referring to themselves as opposition, and that party has vice chair positions, and trying to work out how our constitution, where the vice chair role is there to deputise and to continue the work of the chairs when they're not there, how does that work when we are in a system where it is, rather than the four parties working together in a committee to make decisions together, a group is, one specific party is referring to themselves as in opposition.
Thank you, Councillor Mack. Without taking us down another rabbit hole, I would agree, I think, that there is a natural tension between seeing the roles. Very often, our roles are collaborative, and very often part of our role is the challenge. And I think there was a difficulty in the previous working groups, let's say assumptions, or at least lack of certainty about the future, that led to that role ending up, in effect, being two potentially contradictory things. That of someone to challenge the chair to ensure that the committees are fulfilling their scrutiny function, and at the same time to deputise for that chair. I think there's a natural conflict there, and I think it's one of the things that this committee is going to have to work out as to whether we need to make provision for both of those roles to exist, how that might happen in a way that allows that collaborative working to happen, but also ensures that there is and absolutely must continue to be robust challenge within those committees. I think this is going to be a challenge for us to get our heads around, but I'm sure we will all do so in a very collegiate and collaborative way, whilst ensuring that I'm challenged as much as possible. And I'll leave that happy moment there. I would also reflect just on the point Councillor Bryan made, and Councillor Reddy for that matter. I do think it would be worth getting as much input from those other members of that former group as possible. Was very, very pleased to see several of them being made alders at the ultimate making ceremony last week. It feels very recent, but certainly Councillors Beach, Gollop and Holland are the three that, jump out at me as being people who've left the membership of the council. Some are still with us. I just note Councillor Lisa Stone, Councillor Lorraine Francis, Councillor Jen Bartle, and Councillor Tom Renard are still with us, and I very much look forward to their input. And I would also just say a quick note for both Councillor Lisa Stone and Councillor Mark Bradshaw, now Alderman Bradshaw, who both, whilst substituting in on the previous working group, actually made really formative and vital and important points that ended up being part of our sort of thinking when we were revising the Constitution. I certainly look forward to hearing from them, and I'm minded, if the committee's amenable, to write to all of them formally, just to say we would really welcome your thinking at this point, both from an outside perspective and from those who've continued. With that, are we happy to note the content of the report? Thanks very much. I'm just going to check in with Democratic Services. I had assumed that the ayes and general consensus in the room would be enough. Is there anything in the report that requires a formal proposer seconder? I didn't think there was, but I just wanted to make absolutely sure. Nearly missed it in DC the other day, and it could have ended very badly if we hadn't remembered. That, I think, brings us to the end of the agenda, unless I'm missing anything. At which point, I'll say thank you all ever so much, and look forward to working with you over the next few months to do what I'm sure will be a rewarding and exciting piece of work. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.